Hello and welcome to My Psychotherapy Career, a podcast where we explore the different therapeutic settings our members work in and how they came into their career. I am Jenna Rashid, the Digital Engagement Officer at UKCP. Our host, Helen Willingham, is the Head of Content and Engagement at UKCP, overseeing all our communications to members and the public, as well as our policy and research work. In this episode, Helen speaks to UKCP psychotherapist Dr. Aileen. Having trained and worked as a psychiatric and general nurse, Aileen moved into senior management within a psychotherapeutic resident community. After training as a counsellor at Goldsmiths University and Roehampton Institute of Higher Education, she widened her range of specialisms to include alcohol and drug addiction, HIV and AIDS, and student counselling in several inner-city areas of London. Aileen went on to train as a psychotherapist and supervisor at the University of Hertfordshire and Westminster Pastoral Foundation respectively, and received her doctorate at Middlesex University and the Metanoia Institute with her research into Black workers' experiences of stress in the workplace. Aileen has also set up her private practice and is proud to have maintained a diverse clientele over the past 30 years. Alongside her therapy and clinical supervision practice, Aileen also offers consultancy to organisations and educational institutes wanting to address difficult and sensitive issues relating to race and cultural diversity in the workplace. In this episode, Aileen talks to Helen about her work within organisations, helping senior management and staff manage race and intersectional issues. They also discuss how her psychotherapeutic experience over the years has led to her book, The Burdens of Heritage, Hauntings of Generational Trauma on Black Lives, looking at generational trauma and Black identity wounding.
Welcome today, Aileen, and really nice to have you on the My Psychotherapy Career podcast. I'm really looking forward to finding out all about your career. Want to kind of kick off with the opening question of why did you become a psychotherapist and what prompted you to begin training?
Thank you for that question, Helen. I started my professional career as a nurse, attending to white bodies, and I say white bodies not in a provocative way, but just to say that caring for people was met with a lot of racial prejudice. But nevertheless, I started out caring for people, their bodies, their physical health and mental health. But the mental health side of the nursing interested me very, very much. And when I completed both my psychiatric nurse training and my general nurse training, and was rapidly promoted to senior post as sister in charge of a unit that looked at psychological difficulties, this is in the mental health sector, I did that work for a solid 11 and a half years. And my interest peaked towards the end of that time, where I felt I wanted to move away from looking at the body and the mind in the psychiatric sense, and to look at it from the psychological sense. I developed a strong interest in the emotions, the thoughts, the actions, the attitudes of others at that psychological level. And I thought, how can I make this happen? And that's where my counseling training started, and then subsequently my psychotherapy training. So it's a bit of a long answer to respond to you, but it's a helpful answer to see the trajectory of someone's journey that brings them into psychotherapy.
Wow, yes. And it's great to hear that kind of the lead up as well. It's why we have this question, because everybody has their own introductions and backgrounds. So it's really great. Just leading on from that, Aileen, was there a specific thing that made you go, I'm going to train in psychotherapy? Or was it just that gradual building onto your nursing and then counselling?
I think it was a gradual building and following, if you like, a desire, an intrinsic desire to understand human behavior. That was always there. I mean, from a very, very early age. I'm the eldest of five. So I think I've been conditioned to look after, to watch out for my siblings, to have a sense of when they're upset and how to support them. And so those, if you like, intrinsic aspects of one's character and psychology, they don't leave you. So that interest was there. And what better to help you to understand all of that than a psychotherapy training. When I did my initial counseling training, I felt the limitations of that. I really wanted to really get deeper into the unconscious. And so my training, which was a little bit unorthodox, you'll probably ask me another question where I can answer that more directly, sort of helped me to not only understand theoretically, but work practically in helping individuals to look at how they transform themselves in a much deeper way than some of the humanistic approaches are able to help people.
You work in private practice and have a diverse and mixed clientele. How do the demands from these client groups differ, and how do you manage them?
I mean, I'd like to answer that question initially by saying everyone who comes to therapy comes with their uniqueness. And I'd like to think that I approach people in their unique presentations, irregardless of race or color or any of the other 9 diversity dimensions that we have to protect. But to answer your question more specifically, I've been really proud in all of my practice to have a mixed clientele, Black, white, people of color. And when I say people of color, I mean everyone who feel they experience oppression or racism or prejudice because of their ethnic or racial identity, anyone who goes under that banner. I've also, within that mixed clientele, feel very privileged to have worked with people with different sexualities, age groups, gender, and so on. The nature of intercultural therapy is that when you're working with people who do experience prejudice and racism, you have to bring the outside world into the consulting room. It cannot be kept out. So I think there is a particular demand working interculturally where you do have to embrace the impact of the impingements of the outside world, as well as what's happening in the internal world. That is a very special demand of working with Black issues, working with issues of racialized trauma, and working with issues of identity trauma, whether that identity is one's sexuality or one's disability, and so on and so forth, not to mention some of those hidden ones like neurodiversity difficulties and so on. So I'm sort of very alert to trying to embrace all of that in my work, to receive the individual in their uniqueness and in their intersectional, diverse selves. It's a task, but I think one we're all obligated to be more competent with in our practice.
Yeah, thank you, Aileen. I think that's a really good point about the uniqueness of everybody, and everybody's going to bring something different. And I guess when someone first comes into the consulting room, you don't know what's going to be brought. So it's about that non-judgmental space and
Absolutely.
allowing that uniqueness and the space for that.
Yes.
You have an interest in race conflict, and that led you to do some consultancy work with organizations and institutions. How can psychotherapists support organizations interested in reducing bias and promoting a more diverse environment?
I think psychotherapists are a really key, and they bring a unique aspect to diversity work, because I think it would be true to say that we're interested in the unspoken, we're interested in conscious dynamics, we're interested in defense mechanisms and how they operate when we're dealing with all things that are difficult. We're interested in conflict, in trauma and repair. So we are ideal, and when we are called upon, if that's our expertise, to support organizations interested in reducing bias, I think we bring the challenge of enabling those organizations to look at the dynamics, the unconscious dynamics, what isn't spoken, what isn't seen, what isn't addressed, what is taken for granted that becomes culture within that organization. There's an interesting and very useful saying is that you can judge culture of an organization by what is tolerated. And I think that is such a poignant statement.
You've written a book, and it's called The Burden of Heritage, Hauntings of Generational Trauma on Black Lives. Can you explain what generational trauma is from the Black perspective?
Yes. Yes, I'm really excited about that project. The Burden of Heritage, Hauntings of Generational Trauma on Black Lives is a title which has been, if you like, in my head for a very, very long time. And I wanted to write about generational trauma because of my interest in phenomena, those occurrences, those unusual happenings that you see repeating themselves in the consulting room in psychotherapy. They come up over and over and over again. And after a time, you come to the conclusion, this is not coincidence, this is phenomena. And I wanted to understand the phenomena of how trauma passed down the generations of my Black ancestors, other people's Black ancestors, how those patterns of trauma, those trauma transmissions, manifest in present day functioning, in everyday life, how it manifests in Black lives. And it occurred to me that a trauma that happened, I don't know, over 400 years ago, the fact that it can still be passed down and across generations through our behavior in families, through values and belief systems which we inculcate from our parents, and epigenetically, how it's passed down in the cellular structure of genes. I became interested in all of that, and particularly bringing it straight up to date, how those trauma transitions still manifest in the present. And being a psychotherapist, I'm privileged to see the manifestations of that in the consulting room. I felt I had a lot to say about it, and I wanted to write about it. But just to say one other thing, in the writing of generational trauma and the understanding of generational trauma, I realized not only was I writing about what I was observing in my clinical practice, I also realized that I was, if you like, the best case study, because I am carrying generational trauma myself. And I became much, much more aware of the aspects of that trauma. And one of those was shame, archaic shame, old shame that had passed its sell-by date, but I was still carrying it. So writing the book was therapy for me, and I hope readers will also see it as therapy for them, and also that which they can pass on to their clients in their therapy work with others.
You said it's kind of been building up, but was there a point where you thought, I have to write this? And I guess, what was your starting point for a book? You know, how do you sit down and go, right, this is what's going to be included and this is how it's going to...
Yes. Well, another phenomena helped me, the phenomena of COVID. I wanted to write a book, as I said, for as long as I can remember, but I never had time. Before COVID, I lived in two places. I lived in East Dulwich, SE22, and worked in East Dulwich, SE22, half of the time. And I also have my main home in East Sussex, near Brighton. And I commuted twice a week, every week, for 48 weeks of the year. I know there's 52 weeks in the year, but the others, it was my holiday. So I commuted and I was thinking, where can I find the time to write? COVID-19 then happened. I know we've got lots of other strains, so we just have to say COVID now. COVID happened and we were all entrapped in our homes. And that phenomena, that unusual happening, that global happening, that pandemic, it was all over the world, gifted me the space to immerse myself in writing about trauma whilst we were experiencing trauma from COVID-19. And in a way, the writing took me away from the external trauma, COVID-19, because in writing my book, which was about immersing myself in thinking and writing and explicating myself about what this generational trauma is about, there was trauma happening outside. And the impact of the two really took a toll on my body. I'm just about reclaiming my body.
Who is your psychotherapy or counselling hero?
Oh, that's a lovely question. Without a shadow of a doubt, I don't even have to think about this. And I hope she doesn't mind me mentioning her name in her other world. She's no longer with us. It's Dr. Tessa Adams. She's been my mentor. She's been an encourager. She was the one who supported me to go into teaching psychodynamic psychotherapy at Goldsmiths College, the University of London, where she headed up the psychodynamic counseling training. And her guidance and support and mentoring and encouragement was better than doing any teacher's training qualification. She had a wonderful way of demystifying psychoanalytic theory. So I never found myself saying, oh, theory is not for me. She just had a way of making it accessible. And I absolutely loved her generosity in interpreting dreams. I used to bring a lot of dream work in my supervision. And we later became colleagues and friends because we facilitated a psychotherapy group for the public, they were referred by their GPs and their psychiatrists. We facilitated that group for several years in Kent, doing wonderful work in that analytic group setting. So I miss her, and I miss what she helped me to become professionally and personally.
Thank you, Aileen. What a great story as well, and that development of your colleagues and friendship as well.
Mm.
And then my final question in this section, but what does being a UKCP member mean to you?
I think first and foremost, I see it as a professional home, a respected professional home to belong to. And I think we all need that professional home that will look after us, think about our professional development, keep the professional boundaries and codes and ethics of practice. It's always good to have one of those, and one that is respected.
Looking back now, is there anything you wish you knew before you entered psychotherapeutic training?
Yes. Yes. I wish I had guidance in enabling me to decide which school I wanted to guide me in the principles and the practice of therapy. I think I indicated to you earlier in the interview, my training is unorthodox, meaning that I stumbled my way through the journey. I started off with a humanistic training, and I wanted more. I wanted something more challenging, more in depth, because I was interested in the unconscious. By the way, I'm not saying humanistic approaches do not have a place. All have a place, as we all have different color skins, and we have very diverse ways of thinking. But I'm focusing more on what I wanted for myself. So I stumbled from humanistic to psychodynamic, and then took on in the psychodynamic training my love for, if you like, psychodynamic and psychoanalytic theory to help me with that training, that thinking, that practice. And so I would really and truly regard myself as an integrative therapist, but with strong leanings, psychodynamic and psychoanalytic. One last point on that. I think if one is truly an intercultural psychotherapist, you may not cling fiercely or exclusively to one school of thought or one theoretical approach. You have to integrate meaningful approaches to meet the client or the patient where they are in their cultural and psychological world.
And when it came to training, how did you manage the logistics? Obviously, there's cost involved, there's the time as well. It's a long training, especially when you've got master's and doctorate level as well. How did you manage that?
Helen, I feel a bit embarrassed, but secretly smug, if I can say that, that I did not pay for one piece of my trainings. And I'll tell you why I say smug, because I was as brazen and bold as brass, asking around in my begging bowl to whoever would pay attention to me wanting financial help and support. And I can't tell you how lucky, privileged, I don't know what the adjective is, to say to you, I did not pay for my diplomas, both in my psychodynamic training and my psychoanalytic supervision training. I did not pay for my master's. I did not pay for my doctorate. I had financial support from outside, from organizations. I have to say, that was easier then. I do not think it will happen now. So I don't know how helpful that is to the listener, but I think maybe the lesson in that is just be a bit bold in asking for some help from various organizations who are interested in the psychological health of people, and see if you can strike a compromise of, when you've trained, what you might want to give them back.
That's great. And I think you touched on a really good point at the end when you said, what do you give back? But also the creative solutions. It might not be going to organizations and asking for funding. It might be something else, but there are ways to do it. It's just finding the one that works for you, I guess, because it's not accessible to everyone. It is expensive to train. But how can you find your own way there as well? What advice would you give to someone considering training as a psychotherapist or a psychotherapeutic counsellor?
Well, it goes back to something we addressed before, which is, before you put your money where your desire is, just make sure you understand what you might sort of fit well with. There are over 400 different approaches to therapy, over 400. How do people choose? How do people choose? So I would say, find out who you are. How are you curious about human nature? And when human nature is in conflict with itself, how do you want to help people with their psychological and emotional difficulties? You need to know yourself, what you want to be as a helper to others in crisis or not crisis. Some people come to therapy because they want to have a leisurely stroll down the road of discovering themselves, and others are in crisis.
Yeah, I think that sums it up really nicely. And my final question for you, how has training changed you?
I think it's made me more open, particularly when I do diversity work, not to be angry with people who put their foot in it, not to be angry or triggered too much by people who might say the wrong things because they themselves are struggling with their own fears and anxiety about race issues, to be a little bit more understanding. I think it's made me stronger to help others and to bear the vicarious trauma that comes undoubtedly your way of helping people who are in deep distress.
Great. I think that sums it up perfectly. As you said, Aileen, through our chat today, I think we've really got an idea of you and the development you've had through your career. And I just want to say thank you very much for talking to me today.
And thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
That was UKCP psychotherapist Aileen speaking to Helen Willingham, our Head of Content and Engagement. If you're interested in exploring training, then you can visit our psychotherapy training page, where you can find information on psychotherapy as a career, as well as the different training pathways available to you. Just go to www.psychotherapy.org.uk/psychotherapy-training. All episodes of My Psychotherapy Career are available on our website, psychotherapy.org.uk. You can also subscribe to our channel, UKCP, on your favourite streaming platform. Do you have feedback you'd like to share with us on this episode or any from our series? Get in touch with us at communications@ukcp.org.uk. Join us again next month. Till then, thank you for listening and take good care of yourselves.